Welcome to Reddit Recap. Don't forget to subscribe. Reddit asks, what's the best way you've seen someone rebel against school rules? We had a French teacher who was really bad and most people barely tolerated. It happened a few times that whoever arrived first would stand outside her door as if waiting for her to show up and unlock it. And the rest of the class would just queue up behind them pretending to believe them. Meanwhile, the teacher would just be sitting inside wondering where her class was. Elementary school had a ban on extreme hair colors. My brother shows up with fire truck red hair. Principal stops us both as we're entering the school and she's going off on my brother. She's berating him, saying, "Who do you know that has red hair like that?" Without skipping a beat. Ronald McDonald. Principal just grabbed him, drug him into the office. My 4th grade brain was in shock that he just won up to grown up like that. She called my dad and he promptly didn't give a fuck, and months later bro went from red to green to purple. Guy was wearing shoes against the uniform policy and was asked to put on shoes from lost property. He went around school barefoot all day. A kid was passing notes, and the teacher caught him and insisted he had to give the note so she could read it out loud. He ate the note. When I was in grade 7, our last class of the day, students would always bring in snacks. Our lunch shift was way too early in the day, so by the end of the school day we'd all be feeling hungry. And we were all told by our teacher that if we didn't have enough to share we couldn't eat in the classroom. One day, almost all of us brought in enough food to share, even with the students that didn't bring anything in. We even synchronized the times that we pulled all our food out. Our teacher was clueless. She had no idea what to tell us. There wasn't any school-wide no food in classrooms rule, so she couldn't run to the principal. Finally she gave in to our malicious compliance and allowed us to share food for the rest of the period. I transferred to a high school in the deep south my junior year, from an American school for servicemen's families in Germany. They had just introduced a dress code and so everyone was rebelling against it. One of my male friends wore a dress which adhered to the dress code. He got suspended for creating a disturbance. I rollerbladed to school, and I realized that rollerblades met with the dress code. Shoes will be worn at all times and cover the heel and toes. So I wore them to school. My homeroom teacher thought it was hilarious. The principal did not. He pulled me into his office and told I had to change because of insurance liability. I explained that I'd been skating since I was 2. I had more experience on skates than some of the freshmen had walking. He agreed, but sort of pleaded. I told him I saw his point, but the dress code stated that shoes had to be worn at all times and I'd forgotten them in homeroom. So he grabbed a random freshman out of the hall to fetch them for me. In 11th grade, now 30 years ago, we were told to use Memorial Day as a weather makeup day from Hurricane Hugo. Us students, and many teachers, felt this was disrespectful and suggested to just add the day to the end of the school year. The state insisted. Very few people showed up for school including me, my brother, and most of the faculty. It wasn't a big defiant act or anything, but I loved it and it always stuck with me. One day in high school, we had a particularly hard snow. We were certain school would be cancelled, but womp womp. No dice. No one was allowed to leave the building during lunch. But a bunch of kids said fuck it that day and ran outside to have a big ol' snowball fight. We all watched as they had an awesome time, and a couple of randos joined in. I was too chicken shit. They all got detention, but I know it was worth it. It was so simple and harmless. And I remember it almost 15 years later. Edit. Not the same school as you, Kylib 209 haha. I grew up near Chicago. I was at a private school that had rules about the length of boys' hair. One guy in particular always ignored the rule and the administration would tell him to get a haircut every so often. But he never did. Eventually when his hair got about down to his shoulders, the principal pulled him aside and told him his hair was twice the allowed length and by next week it needed to be shortened by half. Monday rolls around and he comes in with half his head shaved, and the other side as long as ever. We were impressed by literal interpretation of the principal's request, but it still ended up with him getting a suspension for a week and he had to shave the other side before he could come back. Okay, so we need to have clear backpacks. Right? This kid puts quite the vulgar image depicting the counselor on one of his notebooks and packs it against the edges of the pack. Teacher said boys need their shirts tucked in. Never said how much needs to be tucked in. So when one of my friends got told to tuck in his shirt, he stood still, used one finger, and tucked in a tiny portion of the back of his shirt into his pants. Then walked off. Was later called to the office because they thought he was acting out and not obeying rules. But the kid's parents said that he followed the rule. It never said the whole shirt needs to be tucked in. So the principal, secretary, and teacher all have to let the kid off. The next day, the principal makes an announcement to the whole school that boys need to have their entire shirt tucked in the entire way. We laughed about it. Senior year. My school banned jackets. A friend was cold. Wore his jacket to lunch. And the VP told him to take it off. Friend pulls out the student handbook and asks where it said he couldn't wear it. VP flips for a while and ends up showing him the comma or anything. The administration seems disruptive. Clause. Friend rolls his eyes but takes off his coat. The next day, friend comes in with the same tweed sport coat the VP wore every day. After 9/11 my school made a rule where we had to wear our school IDs. They went overboard quick handing out detention to anyone who didn't wear one. One kid had his ID blown up and put on a shirt. On the back it said yes I'm wearing my F-King ID. He got detention for not wearing it with the shirt. I had a teacher who got into a power struggle with every reasonably smart kid. So we tended not to try in her class. As a result, she began to grade the progress monitoring tool we used. This proved to me that the tool didn't matter. If it did, she would have graded it from the start instead of waiting until she realized she looked bad. So I began to fail every test I took on the platform. She was really angry at me and told me to call my parents. But my parents backed me because choosing to fail is not a violation of any rule. I was in a Christian high school at the time. The day before winter break rolls around and I had packed a few Toblerone chocolate bars and some notes for the teachers I most appreciated, with the intention of leaving them as a Christmas gift. Before school the principal made a public announcement that students were not to give any teachers any gifts unless we were going to give all teachers the same gift. This was obviously a bit of a problem since I couldn't exactly come back the next day with additional candy bars. So I marched into her office to address this issue. Upon entering the office I made a show of opening a chocolate bar and breaking off exactly one piece and placing it on her desk. I told her that I was going to give her a full candy bar. But I now had to share her chocolate bar with other teachers that I didn't really care so much about anyways. That rule was quietly lifted. My daughters both went to a Catholic high school. My younger one had a bit of a wild streak. The girls were required to wear a skirt every day to school. My daughter did not care for this rule and wore her skirt around her head one day since the dress code required the students to wear a skirt. Just not wear. I was told that she was wearing spandex underneath. That's how my daughter got a new rule in her high school dress code. In my private school boys were required to wear a collared shirt. It really wasn't enforced. Until one day it was. I was wearing a sweater without a collared shirt underneath and I had to go back to the dorm and change. I argued that I didn't look ratty or underdressed at all. But they said rules were rules. The next day I wore a white t-shirt with a collar, cut off from one of my older shirts, stapled to it. It looked terrible. But rules are rules. My brother missed enough school during the year that the school required he attend summer school. The penalty for not attending summer school? You'll be kicked out of summer school. So he never went. And they didn't hold him back. Because he knew all the material. After the Columbine shooting, our school banned black trench coats. For the most part. Nobody cared. Except the mysteriously gothic trench coat kid. He had worn a trademark black trench coat every single day because it made him different. And then all of a sudden the school tells him he can't do that anymore. So the kid went out of his way to find, or make, different colored trench coats and wore those instead. My favorite one was covered in duct tape. TLDR. Gothic Joseph in the Technicolor trench coat. The canteen stopped selling sachets of red sauce due to the mess some kids were making. My friend carried a huge bottle of red sauce in his bag for at least a month and provided illegal red sauce for the cost of 5p per squirt. Made a fortune. We had an awful Spanish teacher in middle school who collectively punished the class by making us write the same sentence 100 times over in detention. On one of these occasions my friend and I asked her if we could type our detention in the computer lab. This was when computers in schools were a new thing, so we could improve our typing speed. And she said yes. Anyway, we didn't do much typing but did learn how to write a basic program that printed the same line 100 times over. Update because this blew up. We didn't copy paste because our computer teacher took this as a teachable moment and or opportunity for malicious compliance. And showed us how to do rudimentary programming instead of cheat our way through it. Also, copy paste might not have been invented yet. Those of you posting solutions need to keep in mind that the program also needs to print the line number before each repeat. Otherwise how else will MRS Cortez know you typed exactly 100 lines? I had a friend in high school who would stand around on campus nonchalantly smoking cigarettes and would bring beer to drink at break and lunch. He gave 0 FKs who saw him, and oddly enough he never got in trouble for it. He recently got out of prison. Hey Joe. Aren't you supposed to be in class? Yeah. One word. Doesn't look like much in text. But he said it such full acceptance and resolution that the teacher didn't follow up or say anything else. Just, okay. Got it. You're not going. I'll move on and not waste any more time here. And they kept walking. Sometimes attitude is everything. Sometimes you can say a lot with a single word. Friend was told in high school by his guidance counselor not to waste his time applying to his dream school because he wouldn't get in. He got pissed off and went to the principal, who told him it was the counselor's job to give her best opinion. So he trusts whatever she says. He applied anyways and got in. He took the acceptance letter, made a copy, and taped them to both the principal and counselor's door with thanks for nothing written on both. He didn't even go to that school. He couldn't afford it. But it was the principle of the matter. Just after the Virginia Tech shooting, when I was in high school, the administration banned backpacks, messenger bags. Purses were okay though. One guy shows up to school with a purse. They suspended him for 2 days. The next day, most of the guys showed up with purses carrying all of their things. They lifted the backpack ban. Edit. Looks like it wasn't just my school either. When I was in high school, there was a rule implemented that if you showed up late to school, you had to go to the front office to get a detention slip. You would then have to give it to the teacher for that period, who would then mark it down. And you were required to go to lunch detention for that day. I figured out by the 3rd slip that literally no one cared. Teachers, security, or students. So when I was subsequently late for the rest of the year, I would take out an old slip that I had from a previous detention, walk through school, give it to my teacher to mark down, then take it back to give to the lunch detention supervisor. But I never went to detention because the front office didn't have record of me being late. I was late no less than 50 times my senior year, only having been reprimanded the initial 3 times. I even told my parents about it after I had graduated, and even they agreed it was dumb and funny. Back in the 1980s, there was one kid in my school was hardcore into the punk scene. Had a bright blue, 6 inches high, razor thin, stand up straight mohawk. The principal gave him detention for being a distraction, etc. And his parting words that day were, "And tomorrow, no more blue mohawk." The next day the kid came in with the same mohawk, only bright pink. This was prior to smartphones circa 2002. One of my classmates was a regular class clown. He would buy brownies in the cafeteria and roll them up in his hand so they looked like a convincing piece of poo. He would then do all sorts of antics with this poo. Put it on seats, throw it at people, what have you. Obviously the school staff caught on and he got in trouble. This guy didn't go quietly though. He was required to sit alone at lunch for the entire school year. There were months left before summer. The one teacher who made sure his punishment was severe made regular rounds of the lunchroom to maintain order. She would pass his lone seat during her rounds. One day he made another very convincing pastry sauced poo and had it ready for her when she passed. The entire lunchroom was watching out of the corner of their eyes while maintaining an alibi conversation with the people close to them. When she passed, he stood up and snuck behind her and slipped the pastry poo in her purse that she was carrying on her shoulder, and he quickly ran back to his seat. The lunchroom burst into laughter and the teacher had no idea why. Until later, of course. The dude was an artist at rebellion. I went to a Catholic grade school growing up that had a strict boys' hair length policy. It couldn't touch the collar of your shirt and I wanted long hair. So the principal came in one day to talk to the class. When she was leaving the room, she called me out for my long hair in front of my classmates. My response was to point to the cross hanging above the door and said Jesus had long hair. She didn't know what to say right away and seemed embarrassed, but then pulled me outside and yelled at me to get it cut. Don't mess with Catholic nuns. In 3rd grade, early 90s, my brother did not want to participate in some sort of multiple class activity. He just hung around the edges until a teacher approached him and told him, "Now dear, you can't be here without participating." Brother took what she said to heart and waited for a chance to slip away. He made it about 3 miles before a family friend noticed him and drove him the rest of the way home. I remember mom being upset at him, but even more angry at the school for taking 4 hours to notice he was gone when they took a head count after lunch. That's all for this video. You made it to the end. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing so you know when the next videos are released. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.